Hello and welcome. I'm Claire Feldman, your host and guide on this journey to thriving in private practice without the burnout. Are you a passionate therapist who's struggling with the entrepreneurial side of things? Do you wish you could serve great fit clients at times that suit you? Are you seeking financial stability so you can continue doing what you love? If so, then you're in the right place. I know firsthand the difficulties of navigating the business aspects of therapy, from building a website to managing social media, but I've made all the mistakes so you don't have to. Together we'll explore how you can build and grow your dream practice. So let's get started. So hi Chantel, you are very, very welcome to this podcast episode.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Woo. Yeah, so excited to get talking about all things podcasting related for therapists. But maybe before we start, it'd be really good to hear a little bit about what has brought you to the role that you are currently doing. Now, I know this could be it could be a long story here, but it's an interesting one because you've had, quite a lot of diversity, haven't you, in your career that has led to this point. So I'd love to hear.
I'll do my best whistle-stop tour of how we got here, but I am going to take you all the way back to when I was teenage years and growing up. Apart from being a doctor as a child, was that kind of desire. I actually fell more into the theatre world. Me and my brother used to go to an Amdram group, and I did enjoy being on the stage, but really I started to look into the backstage stuff, started getting involved with sound. And it was actually after that I started to pursue stage theatre locally from the age of 16, went and studied that. It was at college whilst I was studying A-levels at school that I went and did theatre production. And then I focused in on sound when I went to uni. So a very important point coming back to podcast later is that my whole degree is in sound design, worked on Billy Elliot, Phantom of the Opera, all those kind of things when I was at university. So when you hear the rest of the story, people are always like, how did you end up at podcasting? Well, actually I started with sound and it actually feels very natural. We used to edit, used to give us challenges. My tutor would give us challenges to edit and do this for radio. This is a story, make it make sense. We had to edit music down to certain lengths of time. It was, it's great fun. So an editor was quite easy for me to pick up when it came to, how many years later? Not quite 10, roughly 10 years. But yes, I didn't continue with that. I became a maths teacher, more to do with, didn't want to work in the evenings. Theatre work is lovely. It's great fun. You get all the secrets from behind the stage, but working, you get in for 5, finish at 10, and you're working Saturdays, sometimes Sundays, very unsociable hours. And I was like, what if I want kids one day? What if I just want something normal? And fell into teaching and did that for 7 years, teaching maths, bit of a 7-year itch theme going on in my life most of the time, as it is for many people, clearly. I had a great time sort of designing curriculums there. And then when I was 25, I got married, but by 26, I got divorced. And that triggered a whole personal development journey where when you're resetting your life at that point, moving back home, the work at the time as teaching was a stability whilst everything else was up in the air. And the personal development journey led me on to life coaching, which I never wanted to do as a job, as a business. I did it as, well, I'm doing all of this. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm reading the books. I'm doing everything. I want to do it to be able to coach children as well as mentor them in my head of year role. There's another skill. And it's, if I'm spending all this time doing it, I might as well get something out of it, a little certification. So I did that, but as part of it, they make you prep for a business at the end, probably similarly to when they work with someone like yourself. Therapists are going, how are you going to niche down? How are you going to, what your branding going to be? What are you going to stand for? And so I came up with this idea of doing it for myself of 2 years ago because they advised that. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I was navigating becoming single again. And I was in the phase of being single for the first time as an adult. And I wanted to share that and re-empower people. So that led to toying with the idea of actually life coaching as a business. It wasn't the intent. And as the more I started to do it, the more I wanted to share more. And as part of that, I started a podcast called The Single Girl's Guide to Life. It's now rebranded to The Single Spark. And I love it to pieces. But when you're trying to build this business too, you can't do everything. So I have been back to it, but it's on another pause again. And it's just one of those, I think it's going to be more seasonal now. But that got to 100,000 downloads in 2 years. It's now 117,000 downloads. I haven't done a lot between 100 and 117. That's just on its own, which tells you the value of a podcast if you get it right. But that brings us to, I wanted to bring everything together. Podcasting or sound design and engineering, teaching and the way that I can coach and mentor. If you can coach people, teach people through maths to do their GCSE, I can teach people how to do a podcast and get out their own head with certain elements. So it brings back it, and I get to design the curriculum within the courses and the programs that I develop, and I get to edit for people, help them get over that. So that's how we got here. So I feel like that's as quick as we could get. But
yeah, but all really key points there that you had to cover to kind of get you to sounded like a real sort of sliding doors moment, that moment when your tutor sort of asked you to come up with that idea and you creating this idea kind of led you to a whole new career in life coaching, but also then the podcast and then becoming a coach around podcasting. It's pretty awesome, isn't it?
You just like, you can't write that. And you don't, another thing I would go back and do is speak to young people, or even if I'm in a teaching role, I talk about always changing, because when I quit podcast or sound, people, my family were quite upset in some ways. Oh, we'd actually being the one that was working. It's like, cool. I knew someone in the theatre world. It just sounded, now you're going to be a maths teacher. It was like exciting. And you get back, well, not backlash, but, resistance of, it's not like the school you went to, Sean. Like, it's not a grammar school you're going into the schools. I was like, oh yeah, give me a challenge. But I would have thought that it was, done and dusted, buried the hatchet, probably would never end up back in sound, even though it's a good backup. They always need cover uptown from time to time, like supply teaching. So to come back to it, I think I think people think that I've become one of the coaches that teaches other coaches things, which in theory I have, but it's not for a random reason. There is a qualification, a whole 3-year study, and
totally. And every point of your life was almost like leading you to what you're doing right now. It's almost like this life by design kind of thing, that you're doing the thing you absolutely should be doing.
Yeah. And I still love it. I still do tutoring. I still do supply work, but PSHE now. So we'll think about that though. My podcast was all about challenging the thing about having to be in a relationship, empowering you to go on solo trips, how to stay sane. PSHE, physical, social health and economic education for children, is that we sit and debate, the trans debate's really big, and dealing with teenagers who do and don't believe in that for different reasons. That's my 2 days a week. That's my, dealing with, should vapes be banned? It's just debates all the time. So it's almost like I have a live podcast every day, but with actual people, just talking to myself.
New podcast idea right there.
I don't. I have had that idea many a time. And I've even been like, do you work with the school to have a school podcast where the children share their ideas, but then you're putting them in a public forum, and whereas it's quite safe. Like, they need the space to say things that maybe aren't PC, because they need to say it here, and we need to explore where that's coming from, and we need to educate on, can't say that in public. We're in PSHE now, we're learning, but try not to say that in that way. Like, how can we say that better, or how can we be respectful in how we communicate our opinions? So you've got to safeguard them as well on the public forum sort of thing.
No, absolutely. So you are very well versed to be talking about all things podcasting. And I think I was trying to think how I discovered you to begin with. I can't remember if it was whether we had worked together one-to-one first, or whether, I can't remember. I think I was looking for someone, because I'd started this podcast. I was looking to say, is there such a thing as a podcast coach? Like somebody that can help you with your own podcast. So I think I had found you on Instagram, and that we had then kind of started a conversation. And then around the same time as me having the strategy session with yourself, I was then also running the Prosper Private Practice Summit.
Yes.
Asked you if you would mind coming on and being a speaker on the summit, which was fantastic, because I think podcasting is such an overlooked marketing platform for therapists. And really lovely to see that some of the people that had attended that summit then came to do your course, which you can tell us a little bit about. One of them being Sharon, who's a member of my community, and she's flying with her Blue Lights podcast. Like, it's brilliant. And that's the thing about podcasting, that for some people, podcasting is perfect.
Yes.
And it's perfect for her. So maybe before I go off and I start rambling a little bit, maybe it'd be great to hear a little bit about why you might think podcasting for therapists is such a good idea and such an untapped resource, perhaps.
Oh, for sure. So the thing with podcasting, it is overlooked, and it's got so much to give. That the overall thing is, you get long form content, which, yes, you use short form to get attention, long form to actually convert and get people to like you. When it comes to who I really like to work with most, it's life coaches and therapists. And the reason that I've settled on that, and I toy with it all the time, I sometimes say it's also for biz coaches, but it has to be the right business coach, because I find it even difficult to convert it into podcast coach. I much prefer, and it's easier to do with life coaching, because you're telling personal stories. And as a therapist, you're dealing with personal challenges, whatever that may be, and going back and dealing with the past. And the stories that you're able to tell, whether they're your own, and that's the relatability piece, or you anonymously share those of clients, it's being able to give them a really deep opportunity to connect. When we think of the most popular podcasts that are nothing to do with therapists or coaches per se, I mean, some of them are coaches, but you go down the Stephen Bartlett route, the Mel Robbins, the Lewis Howes, they all have an interview model, and we can talk about that in terms of why that's good and not useful at the right stage in a therapist's kind of progression. But they're all they're giving platforms to stories and sharing their experiences, and obviously getting their guests to share their expertise and experiences too. And it's the experiences we love, and we go, oh, I didn't know that about that person. I didn't know this. So when I was doing Chantel the coach, people just loved that I was sat there talking about being divorced in my 20s, not really caring about dating in the initial part, never denying that I would ever be dating. It wasn't my selling point. There were a few videos that went out, and there would be a few episodes, but I always made it very, like 25% was dating and the rest was actually single life. Because I didn't want to, at the time, I didn't want to talk dating. It was single. It's actually flipped more now in terms of, there's a dating element to it as well. But you get to tell all of that in a very professional way. So it wasn't how many dates I've been on this week and I'm slagging this person off because they've treated me terribly. I think having that professionalism and choosing what you share, there's loads of things people don't know about, like the ins and outs of some of my relationships, past, current at the time when it was, and even the one now. So you still get to edit that and make sure that you're maintaining a professional and personal boundary for yourself, but telling relevant stories that help your audience go, oh my God, it's someone that understands me. It's someone that gets it. Because even if I didn't get thousands of clients coming through in it, like from the podcast, the message is coming through. And most therapists, life coaches of those natures want to help people. And sometimes we want to help too much and we give away too much. And a kind of podcast is a way to do that in a really boundaried way, because when you get someone that messages and says, oh, I really need help with this, and you give them all the information about a session program that you've got, and they go, oh, it's too much. And you go, oh, should I offer them something? Should I do it half price? Should I do a discount? You go, actually, I've got a podcast. I can this episode on this. Sorry to hear you haven't got the funds right now. In the meantime, here's this episode for you to listen to. Hopefully it will give you enough to start working on this yourself. And there's some book recommendations in the description. If and when the time is right for us to work together, give me a shout when the time is ready, when you're good to go, and we'll get it sorted. And actually, you don't feel that you're leaving anyone. And the amount of messages I used to get of people saying, thanks, it's been so helpful. I think it feeds into the values of a therapist that wants to help and feel bad when you can't help everyone.
It's so true. And I think what you've just said, definitely I can see from experience. So I wasn't doing that at the same times, but I had a podcast for my private practice. And then obviously I've got this podcast. And what I've experienced is through the private practice, when I have maybe inquiry calls with potential clients, something that they will often say is, I've listened to some of your episodes. And so that is sort of that building that know, like, and trust, hearing what I've got to say, seeing if it resonates with them and getting that sense of, gosh, yeah, she really gets it. She understands. So I think that is so helpful in the decision-making process for a potential client. And then offering a podcast episode that helps solve a problem. I've seen much more in the mentoring side of it, in Facebook communities, things that I'm in where there's maybe a question about fee setting, that I can go in and say, oh, hey, I did a podcast episode about fee setting. You might find this interesting. So it's that sort of validating your knowledge and validating your experience, isn't it?
Absolutely. And going back to clients that have picked up on the summit and come through, I mean, Charlotte's a great example of this, because she must have followed me, and my general process is to respond and reach out to her. I believe I did that with yourself. I'd have seen the follow and I've said, hey, Claire, thanks for the follow. Out of interest, how did you find me? Or I would have started to try in a conversation. Back then, it might not have been quite as structured, but that's definitely what I did with Charlotte. Whenever she did follow me, she totally ghosted me. I'm waiting to make this into a piece of content. She ghosted me, didn't get back to me. I never followed up, so be it. Now, something must have happened for me to reach out. Maybe she commented or responded to a post. Actually, I think she responded to a poll. And I said, oh, thanks for the thing on the poll. Something about the I'd have asked a question about the podcast. What are your plans for a podcast? And we got into it, and she's like, I think at one point I must have then re-asked and said, oh, like, what made you follow? Or she said, I forgot that you did all of this. I don't know how I'm following you, but I'm following you. And I assume it's from the summit now that we've kind of married everything up. But we had a chat. She was telling me about her idea. And I didn't even direct her to the podcast, but I think it was the next day and a few messages later, she went, I've just been listening to your podcast. I'm so excited to just get going. And one of the questions she asked me when I'd said about having this new mini course I was bringing out, she's the very first person that bought it, and it wasn't in existence then. And she's done it with the second course that's coming out as well. Bless her for having all that trust in me. But when I said, what questions do you have about the course? She said, how do I pay? Or how much is it? Something like that. And you want that kind of energy when you're working with someone, because it's like in dating itself. It's all the green flags. You don't want to be messaging someone saying, are we meeting tonight? Are we going at 7? When are you going to be there? You're going to be like, oh, no, right. Well, I booked this. Where should we meet? You want that kind of energy in a professional situation of business when they're like, oh, it sounds great. When can we book the first session? How can I give you the money to secure it? I want to say yes now. And a podcast does that work. And yes, I was in the DMs. I still believe in human contact being needed. But she, in her own time, listened to the podcast. I don't know how many episodes she listened to, but it was enough for her to feel excited. If you can get that content right. So my podcast still does work in this business. It just works in a different way to life coaching. The life coaching definitely does, but there's a lot more you can do with attention stuff with the podcast. Whereas I think it's more challenging business, a B2B essentially, as opposed to B2C, because you're dealing with life topics more as therapists, and that's topical. You can jump on a Daily Mail article that relates to what you do and can ping off, whereas that really come up so much. No one's really talking about, is a podcast good for your business on the Daily Mail? I can't do so much. So
something that's making me smile a little bit there when you were talking is Charlotte's ears are going to be burning because she listens to this podcast.
Lovely.
So she's going to be like, oh, that's me they're talking about. But also the fact that you're saying, she listens to your podcast, and that then led her to the journey that she's been on with you. She listens to this, that how many therapists actually listen to podcasts for their own either learning, their own personal development. And a lot of them will listen to therapy related podcasts to help with their own kind of continual professional development. So if I was to ask most therapists, do you listen to podcasts? I'd say probably a vast number of them would say yes, but they wouldn't relate it to them.
Yeah.
Where they could leverage it.
Yeah, it's a great freebie to give out straight away. And no, you're not capturing their data when you do that, but some people are always going to be skeptical and not want to give you their data right away in exchange for a freebie or a discovery call, whatever you're offering. That actually just warms people up. And hey, if they never become a client, they probably weren't ever going to become a client anyway. But we're seeing lots of delays in this. People are coming into worlds and taking a year to buy something. It's slower pace than it used to be, and that's okay. And a podcast can be the thing. And plenty of people that never buy. How many times do you walk into Sainsbury's and you don't buy everything on the shelves? You buy what you needed at the time, and that's all we're doing with the podcast, keeping ourselves there. Here's the option to listen, and here's more ways to work with me in the future when you're ready. If you never do, okay.
Yeah. That's something I say quite a lot in a lot of the posts that I do, is that what we're maybe used to as therapists in private practice is capturing the people who are in the moment. I'm in pain now and I'm ready to invest in working with you as a therapist. And where they might find us is through the therapist directories. So we're used to only thinking about marketing to those people, the people who need the support right now, but we're not thinking about the opportunity of people who are in contemplation stage, people who are not quite there, people who maybe just aren't financially in a position just yet, but they're still having those kind of thoughts and considerations. That these types of things, like building this trust and building this likability over time, is actually so important.
Yes. Yeah. And it's hard because in business, you want it stable. Of course you do. Financially, you want it to happen. But I know the mastermind that I've been in, it was a sales training. Before that, it took me to go to a number of their events in person. And there at the first one, I went, I will be in it one day. I just don't know when. Don't have the funds. I'm still working other stuff out. It would be a foolish idea to do it now. think to get me even onto like their 1-day training took over a year. And then to sign up took another 6 months. And because I just wasn't ready for whatever reasons at the time. And you don't realize how much that work you're doing in the background. You don't know when someone, as in the Charlotte example, is going to come back in, but it's just always being measurable and approached at the time when you do first encounter. There's no harm in reaching out with DMs. Like, people don't always love that. But it's not a cold DM if they followed you and you're just asking a question. Oh, like, how have you got here? What made you follow? Some of them just go, oh, just like the branding. You're like, okay, maybe there's nothing in this then. But you can still ask questions. What do they do? You never know what the connection means. And they might decide they want a podcast in 6 months' time and you just don't know. So, yeah.
What would you think? I think that maybe with a lot of therapists that are listening, they might have so you could sort of touch on that around that you can decide how much you want to share, because probably a thing that will come up for therapists is that fear about disclosure. And is it okay for me to talk about myself or talk about things that I've experienced? And it is very much, you can story tell, you can talk about experiences, you can maybe talk about work that you've done with clients, obviously ensuring that it's completely anonymized. That there's lots of ways that you can maybe create conversations, create dialogue, and create episodes that are incredibly helpful potentially for your ideal client. But can you maybe just give some ideas or some suggestions if a therapist is sitting, they have a clear niche, they're thinking about starting a podcast, maybe give them some ideas around how could they potentially go about creating ideas for episodes?
Okay. Yeah. So coming up with ideas, your first one, the one that I always recommend is the easiest because everyone's most nervous for their first one. The first one is always 5 ways to do this, whatever it might be. So in Charlotte's case, it could have been something like 5 ways to stop people pleasing, because that's what her podcast is all about. So the reason for that being that you want to break down your 20 to 30 minutes into nice small sections. So you can up it to 8 ways to, or you go down to 3 if you feel that you've got lots to elaborate on. But most people struggle to fill that time because they talk really quickly. They don't have enough quite storytelling and pacing to make it last. So something like, I think I did 8 ways to make the most of single life when it was my first episode. So that's kind of your first one. And then there's 2 routes to start going down after that for ideas. When you begin, there's going to be stories that you want to tell and lessons that you want your audience to learn. So it's thinking about what's been like the most powerful thing that's happened to you, to your clients, and then coming up with ways to make the headlines really interesting. And that's probably the biggest challenge, because people don't seem to put enough time and effort into titles, yet they're potentially the decision-making factor as to whether someone clicks that one or the next one or any of them at all. Whereas if they literally just say episode 2, and for example, if we've been doing this one, episode 2 with Sean's podcasting with Chantel Dyson, I mean, podcasting, cool, if they're interested, that's fine. But actually you want to be a bit more, unfortunately, a bit Daily Mail clickbaity. You want to be a bit more like quickest ways to set up podcasting for your therapy practice, or how to get how I got from a good headline that I would use is how I went from 0 to 100,000 downloads in 2 years. That's juicy. Podcast downloads, throw the word podcasting for SEO. So you want to go down achievements, transformations, lessons. And the other one is then to establish or think about like FAQs. And the reason for that is you're thinking of what your ideal clients would have been Googling. So should I leave the marriage? If it was something like that, so should I leave the marriage is the first title. 5 things to consider if you're thinking of leaving. What a great title. It's a little bit generic. There's possibly some ways we could age it maybe a bit more, or I mean the guys have a different perspective to that. And so actually maybe we go, if you're the husband, that's me brainstorming, and therapists are going to know what best fits them. So it's definitely thinking, what are people going to be Googling? So then you've got the ability, I know you've definitely promoted this with your audience before, but the ability to change it into a blog post, and the title will do the job of getting some SEO footprint down. If you do a video podcast, which you should do by episode 5 or so to be able to get the most out of a podcast, you can put it on YouTube. Again, with that title, YouTube automatically creates SEO because it comes up in Google search engine and the way that ranks. I'm not an expert in that, but I realize that that's part of it. So FAQs and then stories and outcomes. Yes, by all means, use ChatGPT for ideas or any other AI tool. I'm not someone that says don't do that. In fact, I encourage it, but you have to come up with a way that it's not just the title it came up with, like, should I stay or should I go? Thinking of leaving. Come up with a way to just tighten it up a little with a few extra keywords. And over time, you can actually train the ChatGPT to learn how you do titles. So if I'm kind of come up with something I don't know anything about, I'll give it all of my titles and I'll be like, write ones for people. I'm working with someone that is a specialist in back pain. I'm like, write titles in this style to help a back pain specialist, because I don't know it. And then we go through and they choose what they're like. Oh, they're like, oh, that really works. And that's quite good, isn't it? I'm like, sure. But I train ChatGPT to do it the way I do it, because titles, I think, are one of my fortes. so yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely something that came across in the strategy session that we did together. It was about getting those titles that are actually going to grab people's attention.
Yes.
So important. And I think I love what you've just said there about actually just know your client, like know what's going on in their life, know the difficulties that they're having. What are they telling you when they come to session? Like that becomes kind of your content ideas, rather than necessarily going down trying to talk about therapeutic models or talk about things that, your ideal client is not going to relate to. They're not going to speak in that language. Speak in your ideal client's language and speak to what they know and what they're feeling.
And let me tell you, because the one that life coaches always do, and I don't know if it's the same therapist, but the what is a coach, whether it's a post or a podcast, but like, what is a coach, defining it against mentor, therapist, coach. And whilst in some respects you can be like, maybe they need to know that, the reality is the same way that the therapeutic models, they don't care what you do. The same that no one cares about really what I do. No one cares if it's a course. No one cares if it's a done for you service. They want the podcast, and some have the funds and they're like, I don't want to touch the tech. I just want a podcast, and I just want to use the podcast to get seen. Or some actually just want the podcast to tell their story. And then others are like, I don't have the budget. I just want to learn how to do it. And I want nice, easy steps too. And I want your help if I need it. And so I've got the different programs for those different things. But no one cares like really what the modality is until we're further into the conversation. What they care about is, I want to get seen online. I want to do it easily. I'm tired of content creation. How can I do this in a better way? I feel like I'm doing gimmicks. Like, it's speaking to all of that. I'm giving myself a reminder of all the things I need to create, because sometimes I lose my way. Even now I go like, I was doing some more recently, and I'm like, I think I need some more messaging on like the pains here. It's that no one cares about the modality, the therapeutic models, or how I'm delivering it. They care about what the podcast means for them at the other end, or what it means to actually go through therapy. How are they going to feel at the other side 16 weeks through the course, and the course of sessions, essentially, isn't it? So yeah, remembering what they really want, not what they need, because they don't understand CBT being different to hypnotherapy, being different to XYZ. They just want to know that you can help them. And what happens if you can't? What if that doesn't work for me? I'm sure is a classic objection that you must get all the time.
When you were just kind of saying there about people who are fed up with like the gimmicks and things like that, like podcasting really appealed to me, because although you've said to me, no, you need to do your podcast on video, there are some days where video is not happening because my hair is scraped off into a bun and I'm set up jammies. So this is audio only today kind of thing. But that's what sort of appealed to me, is that I could just hit record and just start talking. And I find that much easier than to sit. Although I still use Instagram, but I do find that so much easier to sit and just talk about something that I know and that I'm comfortable talking about, rather than trying to get creative on Instagram or doing the reel or trendy audios, all of that kind of stuff. And there's absolutely a place for all of these different types of marketing. And a message that I will always give is lean into the one that suits you and that works for you. And I'm wondering, like, is there a type of person that podcasting would tend to suit more?
Yeah, I haven't categorized this out yet, but if you don't like talking about things, and if you can't, would I say it's like, it's not waffle, but if you can't think out loud, for example, and you can't explain concepts and add a bit of color to some degree, and I'm not the best storyteller by any means. None of my family are in some families, there's like that one person that's really good at adding color to it. It's usually an older gentleman. I mean, if you think of the film Big Fish, he is a colorful storyteller, that character, Edward Bloom. But none of them are like that. I suppose I'm quite animated. I used to have to teach maths. Do you know what I mean? I was trying to get the kids on side, and you can see it from facial expressions, the hand gestures I do. I've always been very dynamic on camera, I guess. And people would mistake that for extroversion, when I very much need a lot of energy to recoup after lots of interactions. But I think there's always a nervousness. I think being nervous of talking or being on camera isn't the thing. It's more to do with Some people just write better, whereas I'm much better at saying things as they come out of my mouth. I don't think I have an internal monologue, so I think that helps because I just go. Whereas other people are overthinking what they're going to say, but they just, like, if I type something, I can type it well, but I'm probably speaking it out loud in my head, and that just holds me back. Whereas other people go, oh no, writing it unlocks it for me. When I'm thinking here, I have to say it right and get it perfect, but on a piece of paper or on typing it, it's easier for me. So this is equivalent to YouTube video, and it's equivalent to a blog post, and it speaks to different people's preferences in that sense, but it's normal to be nervous too. So I sat in the opposite corner where I am now at a kitchen table with a scripted version of what I planned to say for at least episodes 1 to 4, I think it was. It was very much like, read it, but if you go off topic, don't worry, Chantel, you're going to be okay. It really was planned out. Felt like that was the security, but I knew I could edit it because that's not difficult. I now very rarely have a script. Well, I never have a script. I might have the title, 3 to 5 bullet points, and I'd cross-reference that with ChatGPT to see if it's got anything that I forgot. And I'm like, oh, that's a great point. Like, I got a great story for that. I'll add that in. Stats I might jot down as well because I'm terrible at remembering them all. And then I just roll and go with. And you don't get to that point. It's really. I was trying to do a video for my course the other day, and it was an episode of me, and I was editing it to show people how to edit. Well, it was a useless example because it took me 6 minutes to, and I was like, oh, okay, this. And when I take people's first edits on of their episodes, I mean, they're umming every 10 seconds, and that's normal. My first episode, if you go back to it now, I still think has ums in it because I must have edited enough ums out, but not that many ums. So even my first episode, and I never delete them off of the Single Spark because I want that reference to people to go, oh, that is what it sounded like. She wasn't quite as dynamic, and it was a bit more, oh, she's talking a bit slower, and it's not quite like she did progress. And so I don't know if it's a type of person or just a style of preference, but I think you've got to be able to have color in your voice because you've got to sound interesting. You don't have to look a particular way because if it's just you on screen, you'll be all right. The video for a podcast is purely for social media and marketing purposes. Like, I'm not the YouTube specialist. There are people out there that do that, and they're trying to really push your YouTube views, maybe monetize on YouTube. Mine isn't. It goes on there, but that's more because then it's there. If I need it to be there, I'll make it better later. But it can sometimes make it easier to repurpose from there at times, the way it all links and bits and pieces. The video for me is, you can then use all these clips, can be changed into this vertical form, and you can get them out on TikTok, Instagram, and now LinkedIn video. I think that's one to watch for 2025. Big time. They brought in vertical video. Time to get to LinkedIn if you're not, and it's an area maybe some of your clients start using the same video on there, because I think that's going to be an interesting space to watch over the next 12 months.
Yeah, that's really good. No, that's really, really helpful. I think I average about 150 in all of my episodes. It's always around the 150.
Also, the natural part of it. So I don't think people want super polish. This is why TikTok did so well and continues to, is because YouTube, yes, it is still very successful. It's the best platform for making money in creator terms, obviously with the adverts and stuff. But it really is a polished game over there now, and it's hard to get in. Mr. B started early, Sidemen started early, all of those people were at it when it was just on webcams. And we're kind of still there with podcasts. Podcasts have not become this superbly finished thing. Will they ever? I think the big ones will, your Chris Williamsons and the names I mentioned before, but it's low barrier to entry. And these videos don't fully matter because we're not using them in a way that no one's watching me for 30 minutes. Like, that's not what's happening. Like, it is. I mean, if they want to, they can, but that's not what it's there for. It's just the way to start getting there and getting online, and it brings the authentic. People want to see what real people are like. And again, this is why it works for therapists, is because you are a real person. You're not this superior person that's much better than me. You're someone that went through something similar, or we're in the same industry, and you get me, and I want to work with you because there's hundreds of therapists out there. Why would they choose you over anyone? Because you've had that experience. And that's why we've got to share our story once we're past that part of our story. I think the word always, the awkwardness goes, I won't go into detail about that now, or I won't tell you all of it. Actually, telling all of what's appropriate is important. I don't think I'd have worked with so many people if I hadn't shared my experience of going through the stair ladders of life and getting divorced at 26 and starting over.
100%. And I think that can be the bit that therapists will grapple with sometimes, because maybe for some of them, they will have been through very extensive training that is very focused on non-self-disclosure. And then you get into the private practice world and marketing yourself, and it's totally different ballgame. And I think how people choose their therapist now, it has very much changed, where people are looking for therapists that do have lived-in experience of their difficulty. I was picking a therapist for myself literally a couple of weeks ago, and I chose her because her profile read literally like my childhood experience. And I went, oh God, yeah, she's going to get it, So that was the most accurate kind of representation of, sharing appropriately. I felt connected to her. That's what made me then kind of book a call and then start working with her. And so it's that trying to make that transition and that shift to get more comfortable with doing that. And a podcast can be a great way of doing that. Something that you mentioned about repurposing, which I love. Repurposing. Anything that makes my life easier, I am all for. But if they've kind of heard you talking about doing a podcast, do it on video, put it on YouTube, people might be thinking that there's going to be loads of hurdles and loads of barriers around tech. But what we do know, and what is fabulous about all the advancements in technology, is that there's tools to make this like so much easier.
Yes.
So maybe, if you could share a little bit about like what would be, if someone was thinking about starting a podcast, what would be the essential tech that they would need to have, and what would be the thing that you would recommend to like make all of that stuff as simple as possible?
Yeah. And this comes down to, I have kind of 3 phases that I work on with people. So you've got your start phase when you don't have the podcast and you're going to be basically looking to get it launched and get your first 100 downloads. So in that scenario, we actually do start with audio only. That's what Podcast in a Day, the little mini course I have, goes through. And the tech that you need for that is very simple. You either just start with your phone, because you're probably holding a grand's worth of tech in your hand. And if it's an iPhone, you can actually pause that as you go. So if you hit record on voice memo, if you then like, oh my God, what am I saying? Hit pause, check your notes, hit record again. And you can actually, if you do that all the way through and then upload it to something like Buzzsprout is the host I recommend. There's a few others, but I prefer that one for beginners. You could just do that in theory and ignore the ums. I think you can actually go through on voice memo and edit it on that. Now, that's not for everyone, because sometimes you're going to properly stumble and you won't have caught it, etc. So then there's software. There's a couple of software options you can use to edit it, and that would be Reaper is my preference. Loads of people don't know about it. I've used it since I was 16. They have a really low fee for it. It's free to begin with a free trial and then a low fee. Or if not, Audacity is what a lot of people use, another free tool. But I find that clunkier. Again, when I was 16, 17, I evaluated them all. I brought Reaper to my uni group. They all continue to use it throughout our course. So we know about it. No one else has. So all you need tech-wise is a microphone. So if not your iPhone, I grapple with this one. So the Blue Yeti mic is what I have here. It's a mic that loads of creators have. And it's one that I do recommend. It's a good budget mic. I think it's about £80 to £100 roughly off the top of my head. But it's not actually, technically speaking, the best mic. And so it pains me to recommend it, but it's also a really good option if you're not looking to invest in more. The reason for it is, technically speaking, it picks up on loads of sound around. But if you can have it as close as this is here to me, which is about 30 centimeters away, it won't make much difference. But if you want to invest in more, then you're looking at the pod mic or a Shure MV7, and that's getting towards like £150, £200. So you need a mic. If you have a mic, you need to record onto something, either Audacity and Reaper, and then edit it, and then you upload it to Buzzsprout. Done. Apart from doing cover art and things like that. Don't worry about music. Don't worry about intro too much. Factor it in, but that's kind of stage 2 zone. So that's how you start. Stage 2 is then when you bring video in, if you can. So you can start by using Zoom. The quality of the image might be a little bit down because it's recording over the internet. But if that's what you've got and you're on a budget, you start with Zoom. You've got Squadcast, Riverside, or StreamYard, which they allow you to record. Some of them do interviews and some of them don't let you do solo and bits and pieces. But they do record on the internet, but they take the file from both sides and it makes it better quality. Or you do what I do, which is I use my phone camera. It's an iPhone 12 Pro Max. I mean, at the time it was brand new. Now, what are we on? 16 now. So, but Oh yeah, I mean, but it does the trick. It's done apart from the first few episodes, I think it's done every. It took me 18 episodes to get to video, so don't take as long as I did. But that's all I use, and I use iMovie. So I'm not investing in Final Cut Pro or anything from Adobe. Nothing like that. Very simple in that sense. And then this is when we get to the repurposing bit. So repurposing wise, the video bit is the easiest bit to do, hence why I recommend doing video. So it feels like a lot more effort to put a video up. It's not too bad on editing. We've just got to match the audio up with the video. But if you do Zoom, you don't even have to worry about that. But once you've got the video and you've saved it and got it the whole thing, you use a couple of programs. Opus Clips or opus.pro is the website. And that's AI technology that identifies useful and interesting pieces of your podcast and gives you, for a half an hour episode, I usually get around 20 clips. I don't use them all. And at the point we're recording right now, I'm in a bit of a phase where I'm just flooding everywhere with clips because I'm doing some tests. I'm basically seeing what works, what doesn't. But once you've put that clip, I usually go in, it puts the captions over the top, so you don't have to do that. You can add a title. It does do titles, but they're not that good. You want a good hook at the top, get their attention. But you can type that on Opus and then you hit share and it shares it. You can sync it with TikTok, LinkedIn. The Facebook one's not that great because it's a Facebook page. So that's the only limitation I've noticed there. YouTube Shorts. So you can just schedule that all in one place, all in one go. And then the second piece of software that I don't talk about so much, I need to start bringing up, is called Repurpose.io. And again, through signing up with all your different social media accounts, if you post something to Instagram or to anywhere, you can direct it to go out to other places. Now, if you're using Opus as your one place, then you've already scheduled it to everywhere. But for example, if you just did it to Instagram and you were doing things manually, you can set it to just keep doing it everywhere else. And you can go back. So I've been going back to last year's content, just reposting to this year, exact the same caption, exact same stuff. So say level 2, level 1, everyone thinks is the hardest bit because they're like, oh, I've got to start a podcast, the tech scary. That's the simplest bit. Actually, this next bit is more involved, but it's only the same as you learning to use a phone when you first had an iPhone in your hand instead of a Nokia 3310. It's the same as when email came into the world and laptops and working on with that. We're all like, oh, typing, what is this? And, once you've used it a couple of times and you know what you're doing with it, it doesn't take that long. And yes, there's a little bit of learning to do, but I sat an hour, when was it, on Wednesday, and I scheduled 7 pieces of reposted content, so stuff from last year, and I got 3 more new clips generated from Opus and planned those out for the next 3 weeks. An hour to do 10 pieces of content. 5 minutes a pop. Like I'm thinking about how long it might have taken you to do a reel once. It's 45 minutes and then it flopped. I don't care if any of those flop because they cost me 5 minutes. But when my hour-long masterpiece that I thought was brilliant flops, I'm like, oh, Jesus, like I will repost it later, but like I could have done with that doing better now. So yeah, level 1 in that sense, build phase is easy. And then, start phase is easy. Build phase number 2, when you're actually building the systems as well as, making sure you keep planning and recording and editing, that's simple. It's still simple, but it's hard to keep going because you've just got to get that process down and what works for you, how quite you execute it looks different to everyone, really.
And like you're saying, that once you've done it a few times, it does get a little bit easier. I honestly don't know how I would do anything now without AI and without these sorts of tools. I use Descript, which I think is something quite similar to Opus that you're describing, where for me, like we're doing this podcast now via Zoom. I'll upload our video into Descript and it will edit out all the albums. It will create clips for me that I can post to Instagram. It will automatically upload the video onto YouTube. It will do my show notes. It will draft my email, social media posts. It'll do it all, which is just like that's something that probably would have took me an entire day.
Yes.
To do manually. So it's amazing how these tools can really support us and just make things just so much easier.
Yeah. And I mentioned Squadcast. So as you mentioned before we got on this call, they actually integrate. So if you sign up to Squadcast to record, especially if you're doing interviews, and whilst I wouldn't advise interviews from the start for people that are starting with podcast, because you want to be the expert, right? Like it's cool to use that for exposure at the right time, but really they want your audience at that point, whereas you haven't even established yourself yet with your own audience. But yeah, if you are then recording on there, it's going to be a quality than Zoom, and then it automatically puts it into Descript, and then Descript does all the things that you just described. So that's actually even a quicker route if you can then afford those different subscriptions, because these all come with little subscriptions and it all adds up. So, people have got to start and feel like they're getting some return, or it's not costing them, and realize that different people have different budgets. Some people are ready to go. And in some versions, I take all the tech away for the first bit. I just, people that just don't want to learn it yet, they just want to get the podcast out, because it is a lot to start when you're thinking, I've got to plan it, record it, then I've got to edit it. Like I take the editing off. I've got these launch packages that I edit the first 4, so it takes it away and people just crack on. Obviously that has a higher investment fee, but for some that's the right thing. And they just don't, they're like, oh, can I learn it in 5 episode time? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'll take that stress out for the first month or the launch in a couple of episodes. And then you take it on once you're like, oh, this is not as difficult or scary as it seemed, because it's not, but it feels that way before you do your first episode and think, how am I going to get through 20 minutes talking on my own?
This might actually be the perfect place. You mentioned about the launch packages. This might be a lovely way to kind of wrap up the episode, is to tell people who maybe have been listening to this and thinking, actually, this might be not as scary as I thought, and they might want to give it a go. What are the different options that you have available for people who might be interested in working with you?
Amazing question. So I have this concept called podcast in a day, and that's really the main one that sits. And the idea is for it being fleshed out. But like Charlotte did, she signed up for the mini course, which in theory means that you can go through the videos. I think there's about 20. They're all about 5 minutes long-ish. And I think nothing's more than 12 minutes. And in theory, you could do it in a day. Now, she chose to spread it out across a couple of mornings. She launched her podcast in 9 days. And that's a little mini course. I've got ideas for, though it's not in fruition yet, but there's podcast in a day, like as a group, in person or online. Haven't worked that out yet, but like watch this space, because maybe it's there by the time you're listening to this. And also VIP days where I come to you and we do everything that you would do in the course, but I'm there holding your hand. I'm there to answer the tech questions, which is obviously your more premium option. So they're all the same podcast in a day concept, where we're not messing around. Like the amount of people sometimes that I've worked with, when we've got 3 to 6 months to launch something and it's stall after stall. I'm a very red person in terms of disc profiling. Get this done. You just need to get it done, and then you will love it. And also, that's another point to make. Don't buy anything if you're not sure you're going to love it, because if you just try it and you don't continue doing this, you don't like being on camera, you don't like talking, you've not invested in anything, buy the mic, buy the better mic 5 to 10 episodes in. But the other option I have, the launch one that I have, is called Podcast Push. And that means that this is a great package, actually, because not only do you get the editing bit, like you get to do the Beyonce bit, where you just talk on camera, look great. You also get, I'll sort your cover art out for you, and you get the music jingle too. I work with someone specifically who designs it based on what you ask, and you get up to a certain number of downloads of it, which is, it's a great little, because people, the whole concept of royalty-free music's hard work. So yeah, you get that, and you get 5 calls, I think it is off the top of my head. So I'm there with you every step of the way, and you're not left on your own just doing the recording. It's still very much supported, but you don't have to do the tech to begin with. So Podcast Push are those options there. And that's what I've got for now. There are free resources and some checklists that I'll send some links to. And I imagine I'm going to get some free trainings done as well, because I know people want some of that to help them understand some of the things we spoke about today, but in a bit more depth. Yeah, that's how people can work with me if they want, or start with the free checklist. And then there's the podcast currently called Big Vision Business Owners. I can't think of a better name yet, so that's what it is, but I don't love it. But that is it, which is another good point to make. If you're not sure on your name, just go with one. Yeah. Change it, come up with a better one, or not if you can't come up with a better one.
Podcast, Nate. What about your Instagram and your website? Where can they find you?
Yes, so I go by the clever content creator, because everything I do is do it cleverly. Like, I don't want to spend hours on a phone. I mean, I do love content creation, so I could, but I don't want to. And I know you guys don't want to either. So it's and it's a bit annoying, but it's the clever content creator with full stops in between, because we had issues. And website is theclevercontentcreator.com.
Super. Thank you so much for joining me today, Chantel. I no doubt I'm going to see you again whenever I get my summit head on, that we'll have you back sharing all of your knowledge and expertise. But so lovely to talk to you today.
Thank you for having me. And any questions from anybody, send them my way, get in touch, and get those podcasts out so they can start changing the world.
Super. Thank you.